possibilities to represent my native country, Ukraine, with Pavel, and today we are talking about general election system, which is going to be much better. We think that this topic is about general idea, we're just comparing these two systems, without using no special mechanism, because we think if we are told you that it's much better, we will create some mechanism how we can achieve this. And our team has three general ideas why two-party mechanism is much better than others. First, it's about responsibility. Second idea, it's about inclusiveness of a ruled party. And third idea, it's about legitimization of a ruling party. Now, let's start from responsibility. We think that now in most of country, in status quo, this system works only in two countries, United States of America and United Kingdom, as we know as true. And now we think that for the rest of countries, the question of responsibilities for their power which they receive from voters, it just spreading and washed around between different parties. Because now we have a case when government created by a coalition from 2, 3 or maybe even 4 parties. And in case if we're creating a government from 4th party, the responsibility of each of them split it up on 4th part. And if they failed some of reforms which they promised to realize, they always have other way, back way to tell, yes, we tried to did it, but our partners from coalition just failed that. And we think that in general it will increase responsibility for ruling party, and also it create possibilities to provide this reform. And all of this idea of creating one party, of course, winning party will always create government only by themselves, as Tory or conservatives do it in the Great Britain. And this idea creating us two ways. First, it's pressure. This party will have much more pressure on they to realize all things that they promised to do. Because they have no other way, because responsibility will follow them on the next election, and they have no possibilities to tell, oh, you know, we have bad partners and they failed this. No, they will receive exactly this responsibility, and it will pressure them to create more real promises for voters and try to realize them into the life. And other idea, it's possibility, because now we think that almost all of European countries and other countries need to reforms, and sometimes this reform is really painful. And when you're ruling the party, when you're one ruling the party, you have much more possibilities to realize these reforms, because no of your partners skip you out in some moment when you try to realize, because it hurts some interest of your coalition partners. You receive this irresponsibility and possibilities to change your society, and it's in perfect way we can see that on the Margaret Thatcher reforms, because she ruled by own self the government, and she understood whole responsibility and whole risk which she had taken. She had some moments when half of the society hated her, but at the end of the running election, she won other election, because when you have five years responsibility and time to realize your reforms, you can planning much better your reforms, and you understand that maybe in 3rd years of your ruling it could be harsh and difficult situation, but on the 5th year your people will receive and understand why they are patient all of these reforms. Yeah, your question.
So basically, didn't you consider the fact that maybe the fact that law didn't pass is because it doesn't have a majority in whatever?
Thank you, sit down. I will tell you about inclusiveness of all interest in my next point. Thank you that you announced it. Other idea about the mass of we think that if we have only 2 ruling parties, these parties motivated to inclusive in their program and their ideas much more interest than we have only a lot of parties. I can explain you why. Because now we have, for example, some people who supported against copyright law, and they're voting especially for pirate party. And now ruling party understands that they have no chance to receive any voters from people who supported pirate party, because they're not trying to show this idea in their programs, because they understand that pirate party always in a more radical way represents their interest. And in that case we received only one party which based only one idea, and ruling party not try to even have no possibilities to receive supporting from their voters. In other cases, if you have two parties, they have more motivation to inclusive all of interests of some minority parties, or some minorities which were represented by local parties with co-electorate. They will do it in a more soft way, and we also think that it's much better, because they will do it softer and not so radicalized, and maybe some of this idea will realize in a better way. But they will fight for these voters, and probably one from two of these parties will be motivated to include this idea, and in much better for voters of this party. It's also much better because possibilities that their interest will represent in government also increasing, because we have almost no possibilities that pirate party will be represented in government in first step, and also will be included in ruling government. And in that case, if we have only two parties and one of them includes the interest in the program, the chances to be representative of this idea increasing a lot. And third idea about legitimization. This idea going to be opened by Pavel, second speaker of our team. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for his remarks, and audible now to open case on the opposition side.
Okay, hi everyone. I will start with some about it. First one about responsibility. Let's understand this responsibility is a quality of a person, of politician. It doesn't matter do you have two parties or three parties, four parties. If you are a responsible politics, you really want your fraction to be in parliament on the next step, yeah? And of course, you're going to be a really responsible person because you really value your 20 seats in parliament. So you will do things which you had said for the people, and that's important to understand. And so about spreading power, that thinks that it is bad quality about multi-party system, but we understand that when you're spreading power between lots of parties, these lots of parties really value their electors, and so they understand that they have some responsible for them, and that's why we will do more for have his power more and more, and that's why every elector will have his power with his party which he wants. And about reforms, yes, we understand that some countries really need strong reforms, but we understand, but we don't want some revolution in this country. And so if you want to have really strong reforms, you need to ask all opinions in this society, because we understand that today people are really different. And maybe in times of Margaret Thatcher, as we remember, more people were against it because we were poor by our reforms. And we understand that today we should take some really soft reforms, and we should have lots of opinions about by the multi-party system for having an idea and for not having a revolution inside our society. And so that's the way. Yeah, maybe we will take it, for example, about 1 year and not about 1 month, but in future we will have a society which would like this reform and something like that. And moreover, in my case, as is important for two parties not to have a consequence between each other, because let's understand these two parties in examples have really radical ideas. So on the one side and another side, and And we understand that, for example, Republicans and Democrats, they have different ideas. And we understand that you are an elector, understand that you should choose just one of these. And sometimes maybe it is really hard for you the ideas of Republicans, but you don't like really the ideas of Democrats. And what should you do in this case? Because people support and have just two parties in your way, and maybe you have a radical, really interesting idea, but people don't trust you because you are small, nobody knows you, and they know but the history of two parties, for example, for 200 years. And we understand that it's really bad. And so you are, as a person, for example, you are support Democrats, and you understand that Democrats and Republicans, for example, are really argue with each other. And sometimes it is really hard for people to take their really important bill draft for them, because Republicans and Democrats, one party or another party, don't want to have a consequences between each other, because if they will take these consequences, they will looking like as real not so strong as their partners. So they understand they don't want to lose their power, and that's why they will always argue. That's why, for example, Obamacare was really bad, for example, reform, and then can take it for a month. And the country was in a bad situation, really, and we understand that maybe it is not a great one position later. And we understand how it works when it is lots of parties. We understand that they have smaller one seats in parliament, but they, yes, should have relations with them and some coalitions. And it's great because people, for example, who have lots of ideas in his head and support, for example, two parties from all of them, he can choose and support this coalition. And I think that these relations between parties is going to be more successful for the people. And that's why. About the world when just two parties, who suffers from that? First one is elector, because it is really bad for him when he can take his bill draft, because two parties are in conflict. But he really needs it. Second step is because later, because if you are, for example, a young politician, it is really harder for you to take a seat in the parliament or to kind of be a president, because you need to choose one of the huge Swiss parties, and it is really less chances to be in parliament, for example. Because yes, we have parties in USA, but they are not so huge as Republicans and Democrats, and I think nobody knows about them so as about these parties. And this thing suffers this elector when, for example, he really supports one party, but this party, for example, for the president, have a candidate which he doesn't like, and he understands, but he hasn't got any way. He dislikes this candidate, and he really dislikes ideas of another one party. And what should he do in the situation that there are multi-party system? He can choose one in the middle idea party, which is not so radical, and to choose this party, and so to have this idea as the main in his side. So why it is important to have lots of opinions? Because we understand in our world, if you want to have a really huge reforms, you need to ask everybody, because today we don't want to have a revolution, we want everybody lives well, and it is really better for elector to be a politician when you have lots of parties, lots of opinions, and it is really great for you to find what ideas you want to support, because lots of parties just tell you about these ideas and want to fight for them. And that's why we think that the parliament where lots of parties going to be working better than parliament when just two parties who are always fighting with each other, or who will be the next president from which party. And so let's think about people and not political system and politicians. And so let's give people and electors more ideas which they are supporting.
I thank the speaker for the remarks. Call upon other 15 case to the government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my speech, I will continue our substantive about inclusiveness and legitimacy, but firstly, a few points of rebuttal. first what opposition told that question of responsibility is quite personal question and depends on the person. But we believe when we're talking about policy, when we're talking about ruling of the country, responsibility of the party which would be ruling the country is very important, and we are not talking about personal issues. And we believe that system of multi-party ruling of the country creating less responsibility, because as Kirill told that you can have 5 parties which create coalition. When something happens wrong, they are talking and blaming not themselves in this coalition, are their coalition parties, and talking, we failed this bill because some part of our coalition failed to vote for this, and so on. And we believe when we're talking about one party which winning election, which would be ruling country, and we have the second party which will be in opposition, there are more likely to be more responsible parties, because electorate will be knowing and people will be knowing that there is government which ruling and they're responsible for this, and opposition which is responsible for opposing them, and if something happens they're taking responsibility on their self and can it spread on another side and another party which failed this coalition later. About reforms, it also connected with this. We believe that problem of reforms, politics work, that there is some cases when you needed to make unpopular reforms. And we believe if these unpopular reform, for example, spending cuts and so on, they are needed some risk of your responsibility, risk of your reputation. And for example, when we having coalition of parties, there are cases where parties escape to vote for the unpopular bill because they likely to lose their votes and so on. For example, if Margaret Thatcher was working in the system where there was not 2 parties and more parties, then what happened when came union protests, there are some coalitions would be escaped and the kinds of bill were failed. On the basis of this, we believe it's also on the making some reform. It's more important to have one party, because this one party would be taking this responsibility, this party would have this program and reform and ruling to this program and the reform and not escaping back. And main concern of opposition in this case that there was happening that some interests not be counted, that we need ask all society about this. Wait a minute. About this reform. But we believe, as Kirill told you, it's possible to create party program where we have 2 parties and each of parties trying to include more groups of people interests which they wanted to represent. For example, in USA we have Republicans and Democrats. Yes, they are spreading their society on 2 sides, but they are trying to include more people in their group. For example, Democrats including more minorities in their electorate and so on. Your question.
Even if it's unpopular decision or things that are made because there are many parties, we say that the public can assess that, can exactly understand what happened between these groups and decide how he wants to vote the next time or whatever he wants to keep pushing this government, whatever they're doing.
We believe it's similarly and betterly to do when we have 2 parties. Because, for example, when we have some radical Eurosceptics party in Europe and which never won elections and their reforms would never done, for example, as a pirate party, because their reforms, their policies are too radical and our society can't accept this at a particular mode. So when we have one party which represent broader interests, they would make it softer way, but would make in some way and voters would be counted. I tell you about later. Also, they were talking about there was no consent. But we believe the problem of consent is exactly the problem of system when they have multi-partial system. For example, Belgium, Ukraine, they can't form coalition in their parliament for years, and this is stopping working of their parliament for years because they can't work properly, because they reform again and again, re-elect their government, because they can't form this kind of coalition. So we believe that we have 2 parties. These 2 parties shouldn't be agree on each question. The system of check and balances works, that we have one side and another point of view. But when we have 2 parties, there is more likely to find some kind of compromise toward 2 parties, because they have 2 parties, 2 programs, 2 leaders, and they are easily to find some kind of compromising consent to ruling the country. Instead, when we're having 5 parties which trying to put the voters on their way and never find consent because they have more people, more leaders, and sees more more difficult to find agreement towards parties which represent 10 groups instead of 2 parties which trying to collect interest and spread interest over these 2 parties. Also about inclusiveness, they're talking also about presidency, but we believe that in the presidency, in the US case, they are making primaries which trying to put a more reliable candidate which voters would be voted even if their party not won the election. About inclusiveness, we believe that when we have 2-party system, there are more likely to include more people in the election process, because when the party, for example, Pirate Party or another minority party not won this kind of election, and their voters know that our party is less likely to vote and won this election, they never go to this election, so less likely wanted to go to this election. And people became disengaged in the electoral and political process because they know their interests represented by one minority parties and never being represented at this particular moment. When we have 2 parties, as Kirill told you, they are trying to engage in them more interest of different groups like we have in case of Republicans and Democrat case in United States. So in this case, when one party chooses to include in their political and policy program interest of more group, the group knowing how I represented by this party, whom I think I should read more carefully their program and I go to election because I know that party which should be represented my interest less likely to win this election because there are only 2 parties. And also this creates a case of legitimacy of power. When we have lots of parties, for example, election wins the party which got 30% of electorate, so it's not maximum majority of country, and also it created chances of irresponsibility who this party represented only 30% of our population. But when we have 2 parties, there are 2 parties of this, it shows that it's less likely that more people goes to the election because they include in their programs more interest, and also it creates more legitimate election because the party who winning this election winning 50% and more of vote at current election. On the basis of this reason, we make it to propose.
I thank the speaker, Mr. Marks, according to what you earlier, continue the case.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ilya, and today we suppose as a position that multi-party system are much better than 2 parties. So why? Firstly, proposition says for us that responsibility will be more in 2-party system because they won't claim a coalition that they don't do their program. But we suppose when this party say in the elections that they don't do the politics because of other people, these people can understand that there are not only their interests in country, and that's why it will be better for this country. So I mean that when there are 2 parties, their opinion usually absolutely opposite. So there are one decision or another decision, and there are no alternative for people, and they have to choose: are they one side or other side? And our society cut for 2 parties. One suppose one side and another, and there are no dialogue between both of them, and they just try to.
Yes, but in multi-partial system, we have 10 groups of people which disunited towards them and disagreed towards them. In case of 2-party system, we have only 2 major groups when talking about policy in country.
Okay, the problem is that every problem has not only one solution, there are different solutions, and we can ask our people not to choose between two variant combination of our policy, but from plenty of them, and we can find the absolutely new solution, and it will be better. You know, it's like our debate today. We have one side and another side. One side that two parties are better than multi-parties, but nobody says that maybe totalitarian society is better than both of them. We suppose that if we have alternative, and we can represent this alternative for people. Nowadays, for example, there are debate between two parties about some question, but there are only two opinions how we can solve it, and they usually absolutely contrast and opposite, and there are no natural solution. And if we just give opportunity for minority to show their solution, our society can see it, and maybe they suppose that it will be better, and they found some election. So there are also big problem in radical part when there are two parties in the country. As I told earlier, they are usually very contrast. That's why the decisions are really radical. For example, we have to start war with the other country, or we have to continue, but there are no alternative solution like economical relationships, sanctions, and so on. We suppose that where there are multi-party system, every party can not only say the radical solution, but find some natural for our people. Also, they suppose, government suppose that big parties can include in their program interest of several groups of people, but we suppose it unfair when I vote for party only because they include my interest, because all program consists not only for one decision, it's a combination of decision, policy decision. And if I vote for them only because they include my one interest, I can disagree with other their actions, and that's why I have to choose. If have to choose, vote for the party which include my interest, but I disagree with another their policy, or just not to vote. Usually people decide not to vote because they disagree with one party and with another party which include his interest because they disagree with another people. And that's why there is a question: is this party really legalization of this party will be by question, because people don't vote for any of them because there are no combination of policy in program which suit their interest. Because the problem is two problems of in this question. The first problem is that our vote not only black and white, and there are not only contrast decisions. There is a natural solution which can people vote for. And another problem is that policy program includes several actions in domestic policy and foreign policy. And sometimes I can agree with some, for example, foreign policy, but completely disagree with domestic policy. And if we have only two parties, I can't find for myself a party which will represent full my interests. And when only we have a multi-system, there are different combination of policy, and that's why election become so that's why election become display people's opinion in country fuller than in two-party system, and we can. That's why the party which become rule party are much more legalized than in the two-party system when they have only choose between two of them. That's why we suppose that multi-party systems are much more efficient because we include much more interest and much more people vote for parties and show their opinion. Also, alternative choice is represented on television, on people's dialogues and so on, and we can think about it and That's why we can suit more interest. And also, we suppose that responsibility between parties and people will be in the future also. So, thank you.
I thank the speaker, President Lawrence, Fulton Elliott, to open the case.
For 6 months, the Belgian government didn't exist a few years ago. That there wasn't one. That's really, really bad for the Belgian people to be able to do anything, to have any sort of approach, like literally any approach at all, even one being implemented from outside, but it very often happens in international institutions like the European Union, to be able to do anything to solve those problems. This only happens in split-party systems, and it only happens systematically at the worst possible times. It's not a risk that should ever be built into the system. Two-party systems avoid it. And more than that, we also think that two-party systems are actually very good at respecting minority interest groups, and much better at doing that and compromising that with the broader values of everyone than multi-party systems are, where individuals are capable of pulling out at any time and holding people to ransom over individual policies, as happens all the time. 6 pieces of strenuous rebuttal. One, they say you want strong reform, so you need to consult all the people. Well, Oberlin misses the point there a little bit, because the problem is that minority parties are capable of collapsing government despite only having up to 10 seats in a 200-person parliament, right? They're a minority interest, but they have to stand by that one policy that their people really care about. So a really good example of where this would happen is the hunting lobby in the United Kingdom. If they could form their own party, they could hold the Tory party to ransom over enforcing this deeply unpopular party. The Tory party would have to give in, because otherwise they just wouldn't be able to govern. But this is what all their voters would care about, even though the rest of the population doesn't want it. Two, you're just not going to trust the policy because you're a small individual. Well, no, but at grassroots level, policies get suggested, adapted, and refined all the time. So parties have conferences expressly for getting minority voices that are small and seeing whether or not they'll stand up to being a good policy for the whole party as a whole. It's not the case that those voices aren't represented in big parties. They also happen in primary discussions, as opening half point out. Three, they only they understand not only their interests are important. This seems odd, right? Minority parties are invariably all over the world minority interest groups, right? The Jewish Home Party, for instance, has a massive block vote of particularly right-wing Israelis, right? And they represent that interest more or less exclusively, simply because that's what they exist to do. We think that, if you want broad interests, then having broad parties is what you want in the interest of governing for everyone. And finally on rebuttal, they say fewer people are going to vote. Well, actually, larger parties tend to have very, very good systems at getting large numbers of voters to turn out, right? They're exceptionally good at having grassroots level support. They're exceptionally good at fundraising. They're exceptionally good at running local campaigns. Why? Because economies of scale just means that they have the money and ability to be able to do that in ways that smaller parties don't. Which actually means that big parties are really good for getting large numbers of people to turn out. And so finally we come to the point of information that comes from closing opposition. Let the people decide, essentially. Well, firstly, this isn't an issue in this debate. This is a hypothetical two-world system. Would you rather live in a world where you go through where your minority interests are pursued through large parties, or would you rather live in a world where your minority interests are pursued by exclusive parties? No, thank you. We think that either way is important or significant in this debate, and people will then be deciding either way under either system. So, stable governments who can take risks. Why is it important? Well, one, for 6 months, the Belgian government had no government. Belgium just had no government. Well, why is that? Precisely because none of the parties were willing to compromise on their core interest groups, as invariably happens when you get minority parties that are quite small. They cater to a certain interest to be able to turn out that consistent part of the vote and get a few seats in order to be able to do that. When all of those interests come into clash, as invariably happens at the worst times for it possibly to have no government, so times of economic crisis, times of high youth unemployment in Belgium, they just don't have a government. That meant that they missed a European summit on youth unemployment and coordinating European policy across everyone. Even if they didn't have any democratic accountability, not having anyone there to hear the policies suggested by them massively impacted on them. But also having government ministers, even regardless of their political opinions, is really important for doing things like holding the civil service to account, like keeping control of police chiefs. That means the day-to-day running of the country massively suffers while these things don't happen, again, at the worst possible time. Even if all else fails in this debate, the risk of having that happen to countries invariably means means that we win this debate, because it is crippling, and it means that long-term stability is impossible. This has happened in Tanzania, it very nearly happened in Italy, it's happened in Belgium, right? This isn't a minority problem that happens very rarely, it's actually something that's quite a big risk. Two, unpopular big policy is really impossible. Why? Again, because minority interests are invariably going to hold to account the ability to not pursue, like, large left-wing endeavours, for instance. The NHS in Britain was only capable because they had a massive Labour Party and were capable of block voting that through. It was really popular, but if they had a divided party, they wouldn't have been able to whip the votes in line, as it were, in order to be able to do it. But at the very least, they would have had to compromise a lot more on a lot of other things to local interest groups that probably didn't really care about the NHS overall. Only big parties who will have single power dominance in periods are capable of doing it. But three, it guarantees a consistently strong opposition. The threat of minority to withdraw due to class interests is bad, right? They can't do that if they're all Tory and they only have the Tory party to vote for, even if they really care about hunting. It's just obviously not the case that they should be able to get that legalised. But in any case, this is really important for countries like India, like South Africa, where they have one large party and a load of peripheral small parties around it. Having peripheral small parties divided means you can't get coherent criticism of government policy when it is bad, because they divide the interest and intention between themselves and never get a coordinated attack that leads to policies improving. Obamacare is an excellent example of this. It was really, really bad in its original form, and the Republican Party successfully massively mitigated it to an agreeable solution for the entire country. Having coherent opposition that is a serious threat is only possible, but also the division of powers is really, really important here. Like being able to have a Senate and a Congress play off against each other, for instance, because they're both part of different major parties, is really, really useful. You can't have those coherent powers checking the government's power and stopping them doing really, really silly things when you don't have lots of parties, when you have lots of parties. But finally, the effect on policy discussion and why it's better. Well, one, the perpetual coalitions invariably happen. So that my interests get betrayed by my party still happens under their side, you just know about it less, right? For instance, the Christian Democrats Party in Germany has not lost an election in a very, very long time. Likewise, Likud has not formed government in a very, very long time. The change happens a lot more often between the Republicans, the Democrats, the Conservatives, and the Tories than other places. So you get more of a betrayal because they simply aren't campaigning on this platform in the first place. But you're still getting more or less the same thing happen. You're just knowing what the policies are ultimately going to be less. That's bad. But two, policy development is better. Small parties have massive incentives to do sound pieces to appeal to a small core vote. Whereas when you need to drive broad party support, you do an awful lot of groundwork research into it to see whether or not it's amenable to lots of people. That means you have better policy. For instance, the Green Party of the United Kingdom has literally no scientific backing for its opposition to GM crops, but it can rely on the fact that NIMBYism of its core voting bloc massively does it. The Labour Party can't do that and can't come out against GM crops in the same way, which means that, policy is sensibly formed for a popular number of people. It's good for getting everybody's interests accounted for and not minority interests forced through. It's good for having stable governments proposed.
I thank our audience for listening. I'd like to call upon Nancy to open the case for keeping settings opposition.
The entire test of the second proposition is we need stability, we need governments in order to have a government. We are not able to take the minorities and give them the power over the public. That's what we're saying. We cannot surrender to local interest, local group interest. What we are saying is that they didn't analyze at all what democracy is and what is the principle, what we want to achieve in democracy. First of all, we want to achieve that we want to hear what the public wants. This is the most important thing. In democracy meaning hearing what the public wants and doing what the public wants. They didn't explain to us how it's going to do what the public wants, because what they're telling us is, look, we have local interest groups. What is local interest groups? Local interest groups could be minorities, religious groups, gays, and a lot of groups that need this specific vote or this specific issue in order to do it. This is not just the things that we say, okay, we don't need them, this is only minorities. But what they're saying also is, look, the minorities can take down the government. The minorities can attack the government. First of all, we don't think that it's a bad thing. First of all, if there are a lot of minorities and a lot of people who really don't want the government, this is not a bad thing to take down the government. Second of all, we have a lot of minorities to choose from. If we have multi-parties, we have this specific party and this specific party. If this specific party is not willing to go with us as the big party, we can go with the other local minority. So we can choose between them. So they don't have as much as power as it's telling us. Second of all, we have checks and balances on this, because the minorities won't go and take the government down just because they can. Because first of all, who is saying that the next time the government will come, they will be in the coalition? Nobody promises that. So they don't take down the government just because